Hello everyone, Sientir here with a new Rambler for you, and today is going to be more of a personal, vulnerable sort of Rambler because I'm going to be talking about my fears. This is a topic that I think is really important to talk about. First, because I think that we tend to try to hide these things and not show them to other people, which means that we can kind of isolate ourselves. The other reason is because I want to make this coming year, and should be the first Rambler of 2018, and I want to make this coming year one about sort of overcoming these things, confronting them and overcoming them. And the best way to sort of be able to overcome your fears is to really sit down and quantify them. And so I've done some thinking about them and some analyzing them, but nowhere near the level of detail that I think I need to. And so I'm going to do that now with you and take an opportunity to kind of share this sort of process. So there's a bunch of like little small random stuff, like I'm uncomfortable around dogs. I'm not sure if I would even bring it up to fear, but that's not the sort of thing I'm talking about. What I'm talking about today is not things like that, but things that are actually like impeding. So there's a couple of, I guess I might as well just sort of list what I currently perceive, and then I'll kind of like break them down. So I have a fear of judgment, judgment of others, or judgment from others. I should be more accurate with that. And then I also have some fears about the way to phrase this is kind of like fears of the unknown of heaven. And that one I'll get into more in a bit later, as that's the point. And then also I have sort of a weird fear around finishing stuff. It's let's see. So that's kind of a list of three things I think is really good to talk about. So in an essay style, I guess I should go through them kind of the order I presented them, right? But so why not? Let's go ahead and start with the first one of those, the fear of judgment. So this is one that I've actually been thinking about a bit lately because I want to try to understand it better. And as I've broken it down, there's like different ways that I can kind of look at this. Like, what do I mean by being judged? And largely, as I've been thinking about it, what I feel like sort of the core of this is, because there's like different things that can be connected to this, right? It's like, is it about rejection and being rejected by others? And maybe a little bit. There's certainly some amount of that there. But as I've kind of dug into this, it's really about people not believing me, not believing my intentions, not believing what I say. Like, I fear that if I say something to someone, they're going to take it the wrong way and judge me based upon taking it the wrong way. I guess in some regards, this isn't so much a fear of judgment, but a fear of miscommunication leading to unfair or inaccurate judgments. And as I've been thinking about that, that really feels like that's more what this is about than specifically like a fear of people judging me. Because what happens with these fears, just as a not exactly a tangent, but kind of an aside that's relevant to the topic, what happens a lot with these fears, particularly for me, and I imagine for most people with these types of fears, is that they tend to be very nebulous, and we can kind of like begin to name them and narrow them down and name them further. And even just now naming it, like, not so much the fear of being judged, but the fear of being misjudged in many regards is helpful to me, just to name it that way. And as I break it down, like I said, it's people jumping to conclusions about me and not believing me or trusting that I'm at least presenting my view on things accurately. Like, there's lots of different things that kind of tie up together in this sort of concept. But in many regards, as I think about it, it's not so much people judging me, it's people judging me based off of stuff that's not accurate about me, or that I don't feel is accurate about me. So that's a big one for sure. And it gives me a lot to think about, just kind of quantifying it and thinking about it, about how I want to try to avoid doing this to others, where I want to make sure that my thoughts about them are based on accurate information. I don't know. This one's good to think about. The next one that I listed was sort of like a fear of what heaven may be like. This is one that's kind of, like I said, a fear of the unknown, but it's also connected to like trying to hold too much, for lack of a better phrase, time in my head at once. Like, thinking about infinity time is just like kind of mind crushing in a way, because it's not how life works. So it's kind of like with storytelling, right? You can know what the shape and overall thing of the story is. So you can kind of hold an idea of what the story is in your head, in kind of a reductive form in a way, but you can kind of hold the shape of it in your head. So this is kind of like, how can I hold infinite story in my head, right? And it doesn't quite make sense to me, and that be a little overwhelming. But there's just also, this is built from a lot of stereotypes, I guess, that have been kind of culturally ingrained in me. You know, the picture of the angel on the cloud playing a harp is like, well, I don't actually think that's what heaven's like. And this is one where the knowledge that I have from the Bible says, no. Like, that's not what heaven's going to be like. And I can observe also, like, what sort of world has God made? What has he said about what his intentions are in the Bible? And all of those sorts of things, and what the nature of God is, comfort me. They combat this particular fear. But there's always this sort of recurring sort of fear of, like, what if heaven sucks? And you're stuck with something that sucks forever. But it's like, well, that's not what I actually know. Like, that doesn't align with what I know of who God is, who he's presented himself to be, what his intentions are as he's stated them and whatnot. And it's based on false conceptions put forth by an ill-informed society. But it's still something that I sort of wrestled with and struggled with. And even again, like, speaking that out loud, putting it into words is powerful. Words are powerful. And so it helps to talk about that too. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about was a fear of finishing things. This is a weird one, and something that I've kind of observed. And it's actually kind of I think there's a related one, which is like the fear of not having something to do, which isn't quite, it's like running out of stuff. So, like with these Ramblers, for example, something that is kind of a background fear is, what if I run out of topics? And it's like, well, you know, that's probably not actually going to be a thing that happens, because I can just get into different minutia on stuff, or there's going to be new things that come out for me to talk about. And it's like, yeah, okay, so maybe I'm going to run out of specific topics, sure, but there's always going to be something new that I can go to. And there's always going to be able to be a new thing, a next thing. And perhaps what I need to do is, for this particular one, is to just kind of like say, okay, well, what is the next thing that I can say, hey, there's another thing on the horizon. But this is kind of, this is a weird one, where it's also like about managing expectations and being like, okay, I know how to do this thing, but I don't necessarily know how to do the next thing. What do people expect of me? And it's a fear of disappointing people and not being able to match expectations in a way, which, I don't know. This one's kind of a weirdly shaped one, but it is something that I have observed, is that I can have a fear of, like, what do I do when I finish this thing? Or what do I do if I run out of these things? Like, if I finish this thing and I run out, then what do I do? And it's not connected to how things actually work. Anyway, that's kind of going over those three things, and this has been a lot easier than I thought it would be to just talk about. In part, like, I haven't necessarily dug into like specifics, but I feel like I've dug into sort of the nitty-gritty of what these are. And part of the reason why I want to try to stand against them is these things, they can impede me from being authentically me. And I want to be able to be more and more authentically me. I think sharing the authentic me with the world is part of, if not one of the major reasons why I was made. And it's definitely an important thing to overcome then, these things that impede me from sharing my authentic self. And it's worth taking the time and the energy to even approach sharing this. So there's actually, as I am wrapping up these particular things, I want to bring up another thing that I was reflecting on earlier that I think is actually related to this, which is self-disparagement. When you disparage yourself. I was reflecting on this earlier because I tend to think about what sort of things do I want to say for X thing. And I was reflecting on self-disparagement as a way of sort of trying to get there first and soften the blow of other people's criticisms that they might level against you. And I think it's actually related to some of the fear of judgment or fear of prejudice is perhaps more accurate in some regards. You say, oh, I'm thing X, and then you're like, but I'm not like those thing X's that are like awful people. It's like, well, that's being prejudiced against those other people too. But it's I'm not like the stereotypes, right? Is almost in some regards what some of that can be as well. And I was realizing that self-disparagement can be a tool that we can use to kind of hide ourselves in a way, or mock ourselves to try to insulate us from others' mockery. But it's another way of sort of depressing the capability we have to be ourselves. It dampens our enthusiasm for who we are. And I don't think it's helpful in that regard. I think it's long-term damaging and inauthentic. So that's something else that I thought I would share as I've been thinking about this a little bit. So there's probably more stuff for me to talk about with these in the future. And just kind of, I want to sort of wrap and summarize almost kind of the essence of these a little bit. So the first one that I said was the fear of judgment, but as I've talked about it for this Rambler, I came to realize that it's less a fear of judgment and more of a fear of being misconstrued or judged falsely, and of people not believing me or trusting me when I talk about how I view things or where I'm coming from, or applying different, basically being condemned or derided in a way that feels like my actual perspective and who I am is being ignored or rejected. It's a judging that feels very unfair. And then the next one, which I call is the fear of what heaven may be like, but in many regards, this is the war against sort of how society has tried to tell me things are compared to what I know things are. And it's the way that false information can embed itself and cause us to fear things when, and in reality, what we're fearing is nothing but a mockery or a falsehood planted in our minds. And there's probably more things like that I have as things that I don't think of as major fears, but more as minor ones that are probably there, that probably are based on false information, and I just don't know what it's actually about. And society's taught me poorly. That's probably happened a lot. And then sort of, I call it the fear of finishing things, but really this is the fear of not being able to live up to expectations, of disappointing people. In many regards, it's the fear of being human or being imperfect, or fear of my own limits and what those limits may do in relationships and other things. And so I think it was good to go over a summary as well. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that you have been able to enter into this in the same spirit of vulnerability and unmasking as I've tried to present it with. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to go ahead and do my sort of outro. So first one of those is you can like and follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/SientiersRamblers. There's no sort of like weird punctuation with that in it, by the way. It's just Sientir's Ramblers, all one word. You can email me directly if you want to at sientir@gmail.com. And you can, if you want to, support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Sientir. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you have a great day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.